So, what brings us here this evening is the British Council. We have representatives from the British Council, we have representatives from the Kolkata Center for Creativity who will talk about their work. But I want to open today's session with a big thank you to both the British Council as well as to Kolkata Center for Creativity for making this happen, for creating space for conversation in the Indian arts industry. I know that many of us are cultural professionals in this room, and we can't have enough conversation about how to uh, create capacity building opportunities, networking opportunities, how to engender conversations really about topics like this one. Um, so British Council brought ACRI, which is the second logo over there that you see. ACRI is Arts and Culture Resources India, and ACRI it started off as a Facebook group, really, an informal Facebook group. Uh, Informal knowledge sharing, I think, is something that we're all very used to in the Indian cultural space. And the idea for that group was born out of a need to, again, just share information about funding opportunities for master's programs. Today, it is now about 52,000 cultural professionals strong. It continues to be completely informal, and it is a platform for knowledge sharing, for information, for job postings, and so on and so forth, all specific to the Indian arts and culture industry. ACRI is particularly interested in capacity building conversations and in, again, helping facilitate conversations about diversity and inclusion, about different kinds, different aspects of the Indian arts industry that we need to be having, I think, on a regular basis amongst all of us. So, with that, I would like to invite Reena Diwan from the Kolkata Center for Creativity. Reena is and programs. Reena?
Can you please close the door so that I can say what I have to say? Uh, Good evening, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to you. And the people who do not know about KCC, there is a short video that I'll play. But before that, in the center, when I first spoke about including accessibility, my board of director, as I do know, please don't quote me. They told me, but this is a wheelchair access friendly kind of building. It's a very new contemporary building. They showed me around everywhere that access is there. So it was a task to first explain to my own people what accessibility and inclusion means. So the charity begins at home. So I started the convincing part at home. But when I offered that we need a consultancy, accessibility consultant, well, why? We have project team. They can really help you with whatever else you want other than what is there. Again, it was a task to explain them that why we need a consultant on board and what is going to be his role. So there was a whole list of deliverables which was asked. What is going to be on the board for the the expense we are going to bear about all this. So it's really difficult to make people understand that accessibility and inclusion is not limited to only physical access into the buildings. At KCC, just 2 months ago, we started inclusion and accessibility activities, and we actually launched our full-fledged program just last month. Within the building, we first actually thought that people who are working here, including myself and our peons and our housekeeping, should be actually sensitized towards the need of people who are coming with different abilities. So we first did the exercise, and with God's blessing, Siddhant broke his leg, and he became an absolute person to be taken around. I have also pushed him around. So we gave training to each one of us how to handle wheelchair, and we discovered that actually we didn't know how to handle a wheelchair. And recently, just 2 days ago, we launched another one where we invited children with visual impairments, and they worked in Jogen Chaudhary's exhibition. We got 4 of the tactile artworks created. So this is first time in Eastern India that anybody has actually made art available to visually impaired. And those children came, they really enjoyed, and taking inspiration from Vinod Bihari, they created their own artworks. After that, we went to the Manovika, which is just next door. We did our second workshop over there, and instead of actually teaching them anything, we learned a lot that they are fully able, they are already empowered, and they already know a lot of things, but we don't know how to include them. So it is the challenge lies with us and not with them. So they are fully liberated, but we don't know how to include them. So that's how our own journey has started. And Siddhant is here, who's working with us, and it's an everyday challenge for both of us to even make our own team understand that this also needs to be done. Oh, this can be done this way also. We didn't know. This is a common thing we are hearing every day, even from the people who had been working in museums and cultural centers. So this is the right forum, and thanks to British Council for bringing it up. That's why we immediately became partners, because this actually fits in our agenda as well. I'll now finish my talk and just show a small video so that you know what ACC is doing.
Today I talk about the origami and origami, very popular the Japanese traditional culture. But as a style guide, origami has very important or useful property in view of its engineering. Because my specialty is computer science, I use computer to design origami chain. So today, I am ready to explain the Japanese traditional origami history, and at the same time, I talk about my research topics on origami. And then demonstrating some nationalist thoughts. So today we are launching a public book, and it's called a presentation, grandchildren and children to new language.
second venue where we are displaying a photography exhibition which is springing from the collaboration between the MAPSI and Indian institutions. We were displaying in Delhi before, but it is probably more interesting this opportunity we get in Calcutta, Kolkata, as it's said, because we are inhabiting today a very nice institution, this Kolkata Center for Creativity, where we are exhibiting the work of like 20, 25 Italian photographers that are Basque telling the story of our country today. It's a physical story made of photographies, but it's also a story of ideas, events, cities, people, institutions, problems, a lot of things. So I think also thinking of the two countries and then thinking in the two countries. I think it's a great opportunity to develop a collaboration because I also know about very interesting Indian photographers and I think this is a very good way to establish and start a collaboration which would be probably for every institution and for the country.
you got some feel and look of what we are doing. And we can see that inclusion is in our programming also. And we are now going for more diversity. So all of you are welcome to be part of the journey of KCC. Just last sentence, that KCC is under a trust called Anamika Kalasangam Trust. The land belongs to them, and very graciously, Imami Group of Company has donated the money and got the building also made, and also are supporting the 1/3 cost of the building and the operations. Apart from that, for programs, we have to do our own fundraising, or we look for collaborators. So most of our programs, you can see, are always being with collaborators, because in arts and culture, the funds are limited, and we all must actually work together to make the most of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reena. That was wonderful to see such collaborative work across cultures within India as well. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'd like to now invite Radhika Singh, who is the Assistant Director of Programs for East and Northeast India from the British Council, to tell us a little bit about British Council's work and also to talk about festival connections.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. In particular, thank you, Sumona, Anjum, Siddhant, for coming here, for talking to us, for telling us so much more. And a special thank you to you, Reena. These programs would not be the same without your effervescent presence. We are truly grateful to be able to host these programs in such a brilliant space. Fosters creativity, fosters spirituality, fosters thinking and open discussion. So we are truly thankful to you for letting us do this. Having said that, a little bit about the British Council and why the British Council is in this space. You see, we work in a lot of areas. We do a lot of wide-ranging activities, and arts is only one of the things that we do. We work in higher education, we work in schools, we work in capacity building, we work with English language. We do a little bit of just about everything. And why? What is the objective of all of this? If I was to put it in one line to summarize it, it is we try to help people, particularly young people, but also middle management professionals and those who are experienced in their spaces, to make informed choices. We try to tell them more about what's happening in the world. We try to provide platforms which help them to access information and knowledge and reach out to networks, and then make those informed choices about how to go forward. So festival management, festival programming is one of our new initiatives. It started last year, and this particular program that you see is under the wider umbrella of festival management. Under these, what are we aiming to do? We aim to link up larger festivals with festivals in the UK with the objective of sharing best practice. But we're also trying to create this wide platform and network where everybody working in different festivals is able to sit down and discuss all the different aspects of festival management, from fundraising to how do we get a good audience. Just about everything that is a problem or isn't a problem. One festival is doing it well in one place, another isn't. Every festival has its own opportunities, risks, and challenges, and the aim is to let us all sit down and talk about it in a manner that fosters the sharing of all this knowledge, in the hope that our festivals will become some of the greatest festivals in the world. We already do have them. We have Durga Puja in Kolkata. We have festivals in every part of the country. British Council alone is working with so many of these different festivals across the country. And everywhere we go, what do we see? We see this whole range of enthusiastic young people coming forward to be part of these festivals. So our aim here is entirely to help them look at all the different aspects, develop their thinking, develop their opportunities. If you think about higher education, for example, do you know that British Council actually manages the only fully funded arts scholarship in India at the moment, which is Charles Wallace India Trust. So this is the sort of information that we want to put out there and help the wider audiences reach and access all these opportunities. At the moment, perhaps it's a little bit limited to the urban spaces, and that's also something that we are aiming to change. We've moved into the Northeast, as you've seen. We've done a lot of work in the Northeast, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that needs to be done. We work in many of the states, and all the 12 states in this region, of course. We need your help and support to take the information out out wider. We need your participation to make these programs much more stronger, and we need you to continue to hold our hands and work with us so that we build this sustainable, strong network across the country. Today's program, interestingly called the Revolving Door, is all about diversity and inclusion. And as we were just discussing, this is increasingly a topic that we cannot avoid anymore. As you rightly said, Reena, it's not them, it's us. We don't know. A lot of the time when we organize our events, let's not even get into festivals, just the events, we don't even think about aspects of inclusion and diversity. And if we do, we keep it so basic. We keep it to wheelchair access. Are our lift doors wide enough to let a wheelchair in? And we are unable to move beyond that. But as you were saying, Sumona, things like access to toilets, and it's not just physical access, it's emotional. We need to open our hearts and let people in first, and then we need to start looking at, tactile. Everything is very important. Tactile performances, perhaps tactile exhibitions. Yes, Reena, you're right. You're one of the first spaces in Eastern India. But how many people know about it? So these are the platforms that we want to provide. We want all of us to be aware, and we want all of us to bring in more people from every range, every community. I hate to categorize anybody in any sort of shelf them like that or label anybody. So we just want everybody to come, and that is inclusivity. And to do that, we need to address these different aspects. So that's where the British Council is coming from. I won't bore you much longer with my lectures, but just to say, come and visit the British Council. We are doing a series of programs through the year. It's not just this one talk. Around festivals alone, we do a whole range of other programs, and my colleague Mona is here. She can tell you more about them as well. And of course, if you look at our website or sign up for membership, you will get all the information. But do sometimes when you have time, come and meet us at the council also. We will share more information with you. On that note, I will hand over to our first speaker. Yeah. So thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy this evening.
Thank you so much, Radhika. Radhika has set the stage beautifully for today's session. And I also wanted to add a little bit to that. When we looked at this topic of diversity and inclusion, we realized, as you rightly said, that it's not just physical access. That's only one aspect. What about language inclusion? What about community inclusion? What are the stories that are not that don't find a platform, that don't find a space to be heard? So all this and more is something that Sumona is going to cover in her session, and I'm just going to read a little bit about Sumona in introduction. As soon as I find my page, yes, here we go. So Sumona is the founder of Hamdasti and Chitpur Local. Sumona's work explores the role of art in society. It tests the potential in transforming relationships between people, communities, and the city. Sumona is the founder of Hamdasti, a Kolkata-based arts organization that connects artists to community spaces to collaboratively create engaged public domains. Through her work at Hamdasti, she has initiated several community arts festivals, as well as exhibitions and labs on participatory, inclusive arts practices. Sumona is a graduate of the Srishti School of Art, Design and Technology in Bangalore, and is a Harvard University graduate of the School of Design in Cambridge, USA. She balances her time between Hamdasti and Startup, where she works with designing programs and processes for social entrepreneurs. Sumona is an Art Think South Asia Fellow from 2014, again another program that British Council supports, and one of the few arts management training sessions. And of course, Reena is also an ATSA Fellow, so we're very, very well represented with ATSA. ATSA, of course, is, as I was saying, is one of the only arts management training programs that exists in India. Sumona is also an alumni of the Global Cultural Leadership Program of 2017 of the European Union. So without further ado, Sumona, I'd like to invite you to tell us about your work.
Hi, thank you all for coming. Thanks for the introduction. Thank you for having me, British Council and Kolkata Center for Creativity. So today I'm here to talk about our work at Hamdasti and our project Chitpur Local. I'm always talking about the overall project Chitpur Local because it's been going on from 2014. So I always get an opportunity to talk about the entire process, but this is a nice opportunity to focus and talk about the festival, which is one part of the larger project and the larger process. So just to give a little background quickly, so Chitpur Local is a project that is, Anjum just entered the room, he's also a fellow Hamdasti co-founder. So anyway, so Chitpur Local is a long-term project that is based in and around the area around Chitpur Road in North Calcutta. The reason why we selected or we started working in this space so many years ago in 2014 is because really for us it was like a microcosm of the different kinds of communities that inhabit our city, whether it's in terms of religious diversity or ethnic diversity or class, caste, etc. But also importantly, Hamdasti was trying to look at how art can activate community spaces and public spaces. And at Chitpur, there was already so many examples of art being a part of people's everyday lives, whether it's the little craft studios like the jewelry studios and other bookbinding, publishing shops that are scattered across the neighborhood, or whether it's the homes of people who live there whose courtyards used to be used for cultural activities. So that was really our hook into the space. But yeah, we also thought that if we worked at Chitpur, there would be so many kinds of voices, issues, stories that we could sort of engage within this one space. As I said, Hamdasti, which is the larger organization behind Chitpur Local, connects artists to community spaces and to communities to collaboratively try and activate these community spaces. So we started by asking ourselves, what would happen if an artist was working in a police station? Or what could happen if we had an artist residency in a government school or a local library? How could we create spaces of dialogue, interaction, of challenging hierarchies, of raising questions, of bringing people together in such spaces? So Chitpur really is our lab, because there are so many such spaces that we have engaged with. So about 60 community collaborators representing an equal diversity of spaces. We have ongoing community events that artists facilitate and co-create throughout the year, along with open houses where we then reflect on what is happening and bring the community together to reflect on what the projects are and why we're doing them. And periodically we sort of intersperse this work or sort of create a punch through the festival. And why the festival, why we use the kind of device of the festival in this long-term process of community building, of public engagement, of creating spaces for art is something that I will sort of explore as we go along. So it's so we've had 3 editions in different forms of the Chitpur Local Festival since 2014. So this is just a 1-minute glimpse into the 2nd edition, which was in 2018. As you can see, during the festival, say 8 artists have been working together for over 1.5 years. The projects then are showcased or culminate in an event which happens at different spaces across the neighborhood, whether it's a rock or whether it's somebody's house or the police station. And you'll see a little bit more about how people engage with that. So as I was saying, since we have 3 editions of the festival, since our focus has been to activate kind of an ecosystem of people who are our partners, collaborators, an ecosystem of spaces which support and kind of foster the arts, we've been making a shift in each festival. So the 1st edition, we mainly worked with students of the Oriental Seminary School, where the artists were the lead and the students were the participants, the contributors, and we were slowly trying to shift ownership to them till a point that they felt that they could take it forward, or maybe their school could take it forward. That was the initial hope. The second edition, which was last in 2018, again we had a larger group of artists. This time, we had reached out to people and kind of talk about the process, but we reached out to a larger group of diverse artists and non-artists as well to facilitate projects in different community spaces, build local collaborations beyond students. So here we were working with residents, the police, local clubs, and they were the co-hosts in a way of the project. So again, there was a progression from being a participant to a co-host. And then we branched off, and last year we focused specifically on our craft-based partners in the neighborhood, and we had the Chitpur Craft Trail last year, where we asked the craftspeople themselves and our local collaborators themselves to host whatever they wanted to, whether it's a workshop, whether they wanted an installation, whether they wanted to give a talk. So we created a trail where you connected across 18 different little craft studios across the neighborhood, and you walked around from one point to another and was completely self-led. So you got a map and people led you from one place to another. So we tried to take a back seat and let it be more driven by people who are living there, working there, and in their everyday spaces. So that's kind of been our transition from the beginning. And why do we always punctuate our work with these festivals? What do we really think can be the role of festivals in the kind of work that we're doing? And this has been an interesting opportunity to think about that, really. I think a lot of times we think about festivals as celebrating something, celebrating diversity, showcasing something. It's almost like an end point. But I think what happens is often festivals end up reinforcing existing hierarchies. Festivals become about power. Who has power, and how can we continue to establish our power, showcase ourselves? And we can see that even with Durga Puja, how that is used, or in any festival when we are really keeping status quo alive, right? Or it's being used as an instrument of that. And it's a very powerful way of sort of, continuing certain narratives and certain discourses. So how can we imagine alternative festivals? How can we really go back to the notion of what is a carnival, what is a festival? And if we look back to history, we see a festival is a moment of upturning hierarchies. A festival is a moment of chaos, of breaking rules, of parody, of mockery, of people being able to, take position, go shift from one position of power to another and take over, say something without consequence. So festival is really a kind of a disruptive space, and in that sense it becomes less, if we start thinking about it more as this kind of space of bringing people together, of creating disruptions, of creating new imaginations. It becomes more of a catalyst rather than a place of celebration. And I think that's how we try to think about it at Chitpur. If we only look at festivals, celebration is very important, but if we only look at festivals as a way of showcasing something or celebrating something, then we're really not looking at it as a dynamic and creative space. And I would urge you to think about this in other contexts as well. Whether we're doing an exhibition, in a gallery, is that space becoming a generative space, or is it becoming something, is it sort of validating what already we know and what already exists? How do we, in any form of art making or any event that we do, whether it's an exhibition, whether it's a theatre festival, whether it's an art festival, create a space for, create a generative space for this kind of chaos, confusion, and by that extension, inclusion and diversity. So we're not looking at sort of creating a platform for inclusion and diversity, but that becoming very core to the notion and the kind of spirit of a festival. So I think that's how we try to think of it at Hamdasti. We're looking at a festival as a moment of, we look at festivals not just as celebrations but as catalysts. There are three key ideas, like collective, bringing people together. Disruptive, once you bring people together, is it enough to just have diverse people in a room? But what can we do which sort of disrupts the existing patterns and comfort zones that we exist in? And through that disruption, what are the kind of creative moments, imaginations, or utopic ideas that can come out? So hopefully I'm not sort of going off on too much of theory, and I will sort of go back to examples of what we're saying, but I hope you can just take this as a provocation to think about, are festivals re-establishing status quo, or are they becoming a generative, creative, disruptive space through which something new can emerge? Because otherwise I feel like we'll get co-opted by larger political systems that use festivals for perpetuating existing powers. So I wanted to take this opportunity to then think about these three ideas of how can a festival be collective, disruptive, and utopic, and give you some examples of what we're trying to do and where we're failing as well. So festival as a catalyst, how can we look at festival making as a collective process? And by doing that itself, we are now moving power and authority from one person to a larger collaborative system. So when we started, when we start one phase of Chitpur Local, the second phase when we started, we were wondering how do we even bring artists on board who are doing different things. We know a few people. If we invite them, we'll still be in our own bubble and our own networks. So the first time what we tried to do was we did these round tables where we invited anybody who works with the city in any way. So we were not limiting it to artists, we were not limiting it to people who are doing public art or social art or anything. Anybody who's worked with the idea of the city to come together. And we had 3 round tables where we asked people to present their work and through that propose collaborations. And whoever then was proactive and interested in proposing a collaboration became a part of the project. We didn't have a selection, we didn't have a criteria, it was a kind of organic thing. But then again, this got limited to our perhaps circles, who we could invite and who got to know about it, who's a part of Studio 21 gallery at that point of time or not. So next time around for this edition, the edition we're currently on right now, we did an open call in 3 languages, in Hindi, Bengali and English. We tried to keep the questions also really simple, down to 3 or 4 questions. So it's not intimidating for people to answer, and we did get a kind of larger diversity, but still I feel like there wasn't enough religious diversity or gender diversity or people with other abilities either. So we're working on this, we're trying to build this. So how do even the group of artists become diverse? What has happened is we have a historian working alongside with artists, along with a journalist. So there's a mix of people who we look at as creative practitioners. Then from the artists, when they start engaging with people at Chitpur, in the different communities that we work with, the focus is always then shifting the position of the artist from the author and passing on that authorship. So here you can see Ruchira, who worked with the students of Vidyaniketan school. She was leading the process initially, but her whole idea was over the course of 1 year, by the end of it, the tables turn, and they are the ones who are then taking ownership and taking the projects forward. And this we've seen works more easily with students. Maybe it's not always easy to do this with everybody else in the area. So co-creating and shifting authorship is a part of this collective process. A part of bringing people together is also, like Ricky said, using different languages. So for whatever we do, there's Hindi, Bengali and English. So the brochures and the other handouts are all in Hindi as well. We also try to use local materials, local skills and crafts which are available at Chitpur. So this is the bamboo armature that is made in the neighborhood. And also, as you can see, we try to do the events at places where we can create a platform for people who live and work in that community. So one of the artists, her work was situated inside or outside the Sea Bros photo studio, and they used the opportunity to do an exhibition of their archival material and all the old cameras that they have in their collection, because they are celebrating their 100th year as a part of the event. So how can we also then look at language, local materials, location as ways of bringing people together, diverse audiences together, and creating this collective notion of a festival? And speaking of bringing different audiences together, there's one thing, where Shota Datta created a bioscope and you place it on a street. But how do you really make that accessible? Is that really enough? In terms of physical accessibility, Chitpur roads are infamously unnavigable. But even if you talk about, somebody passing by, do they feel like that's something they can engage with, or it's not for them? It's not something they'll understand. So for that, you use things like auto rickshaw to make the announcements, loudspeakers. So you use things that people are used to and comfortable with to speaking with them, not handing out, not having a QR code or an app that people might not be able to use. So that's one. You also try to do different kinds of events. So if you're doing art, and I think a lot of people then say, oh, that's not for me. What is this social art, community art? So along with that, you have walks, films, and other kinds of programming to engage different kinds of audiences and enable them to come. And finally, I think it's the artists themselves and how they position their work, how accessible they make it in terms of what the artwork really is, because you can do whatever you can, but if the artwork itself is loaded in academic references, then maybe you won't finally make that jump. So how do you really? So Shroda made this bioscope which had a kind of moving story inside, but she also created these handouts which she asked people to respond to that bioscope. So within the artwork itself or within the work itself, you have to code some elements of engagement, interaction, and our challenges challenges have been, we've used different kinds of media to reach out to different audiences. But our challenges, of course, have been, in terms of disability in that neighborhood. Sometimes in the areas that we do, there's not even a working bathroom. So how do we manage to do all of that within our budgets and our work and our scope? So yeah, so that's a little bit about how can we think of the festival making itself as a collective process. And by thinking of it as a collective process, we are already shifting and challenging who's included, who's not included, who's left out of that process. And moving on, once people come together, what happens? Is it enough to just bring a bunch of different people into a room? And is that really is that really how festivals can create catalytic moments, or can we do something more? So what we try to do is, when you come to one of our Chitpur local events, you come to the main desk or the registration desk. So this one was at the Jorabagan traffic guard, so in the police station. And you come, you register. We invited the young people who had worked with us in the previous editions to be the leaders and the kind of managers of this edition. So you register, and then there's an ongoing. It's not a heritage walk. It's a guided tour that people take you to the different projects which are located all around that neighborhood. So here you have a picture of art historian Sumona Chakravarty. She is taking a group of people, and once you go on this meandering walk through different lanes and bylanes, you end up with peculiar experiences like playing a card game at a local club. So how do we, once we bring people together, take them out of their comfort zones, help them have an experience that they haven't had before, and do something which makes them perhaps think about their own city and their own lives in a slightly different way? What ended up happening when we use this device of a guide, we decided that we are going to not have guides from one background. So we're not going to have all art historians or even people from the arts. The kids can be a guide. Somebody living in the neighborhood can be a guide. A young student who's studying design can be a guide. So initially we got a lot of pushback on that but these people don't know everything about the history of this neighborhood, and so everybody expects an expert. But I think that's also perhaps something we need to challenge. Why isn't the perspective of a child who goes to these streets every day as valid as an art historian who can talk about the history of Chitpur and its Botpala prints? So we had tours led by different people from the area, taking people around the neighborhood and creating these unusual interactions. So at the Jorabagan traffic guard, we had a game that we had installed. But it was very important, while people were coming and playing the game with their friends, it was very important for us that people play games with people they don't know, and especially with the police. So what would happen if you played a game about traffic in your city or how you navigate your city with a police officer? So there were these moments where we were really happy, where the students were playing with the cops, and that again creating these unfamiliar interactions. So again, just want to reiterate that it's not enough to just create an inclusive place and bring different people into the room, but what happens once they're in the room? Can we create unusual encounters, unfamiliar interactions, challenge how people perceive their hierarchies, and what is the way in which art can facilitate those kinds of encounters? And the last thing is about utopic imaginations. So you brought different people together, you made them have interesting encounters. What then? And that's when I think the notion of celebration comes in. That's when the notion of imagination comes in. And can these experiences be ways for people to think about new possibilities for their communities, for their streets? So can an artist project in a dalan where there's a carom competition happening along with a fanush happening along with a performance really shift people's understanding of how these dalans can be used in the future? And that has happened. So Anuradha worked very closely with 3 or 4 houses, and they in this edition of Chitpur Local have opened up their homes for a fellowship for artists. So this is sort of in the ways in which people say, oh, this is also possible, and they're not just working with us, they're working with other festival organizers in the city to do a concert or do another event. So it really opens up such possibilities. There are lots of craft shops, bookstores, and traditional crafts sort of at Chitpur. So our work with them through that way, like Diamond Library. So through our work with them, we're wondering that, okay, then can these spaces become little workshop spaces, studios, people to come and learn different crafts? And that slowly started happening as well through our work with the Chitpur Craft Collective. And then finally, can street corners, local clubs, dead ends and culverts, become spaces for bringing people together to discuss issues from gender to conservation to the role of the police in society. And so this is Shrota's bioscope again, where it just happened to be, it was all about how women are sort of photographed before marriage. So it just happened to be along with the Saraswati Puja in that area, so we collaborate with the local club. But so again, now we're working with the BAM committees and the local clubs in the area to develop projects on gender and, you know, discussing ideas around gender identity. So yeah, can festivals then become moments where, because it's so beautiful, it's so utopic when you come for this experience, can it really inspire people to then create and ideate and think about new ways and new like, you know, ideas for the spaces that otherwise seem so ordinary and otherwise seem so inconsequential in their everyday lives. So yeah, so that's, I guess, what I wanted to talk about diversity inclusion in this larger way. I think even at Chitpur, we always talk about these circles that we've been able to crack. First, the students got involved, then the residents and the craftspeople. But then there's the other circle, you know, like the coolies in the area or the people who are sort of the migrant workers in the area. And then moving further to Nakhota Masjid. So how do we continue to expand that circle and continue to, you know, create art that pushes that boundary and tries to inhabit that edge and then the next edge and then the next edge? So continue to be disruptive and creative, collective and utopic in that sense. So yeah, so that's how we look at festivals, and that's just a little bit about Chitpur local.
Thank you, Sumona. That was fantastic. When we first spoke about Sumona being part of this session, she was very, very insistent that we first unpack what does it mean, what is a festival, what does the idea of a festival mean, and I hope we can talk about that a little bit as well in our panel discussion after Anjum Di and Siddhant speak as well. So thank you for setting the context of the potential of what a festival can achieve. Over to Anjumdi now, who will bring her experience of many, many years. And she comes to us and she will speak to us from the programming and the content aspect of a festival. How can that address diversity and inclusion? So, naturally, she needs no introduction, but I will briefly. Anjum Katyal is a writer, editor, translator, and critic. She has been working in the literary arts and culture field for close to half a century. She is the author of several books on theatre and performance, chief editor of Seagull Books, Calcutta, editor of Seagull Theatre Quarterly, and she has translated works by Habib Tanveer Mahashweta Devi and Meera Mukherjee. A published poet, Anjum has also sings the blues and reviews and writes on theatre and the visual arts. She is currently curator of the new festival in Shantiniketan and director of the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival. I'd like to invite you, please. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. Thank you for coming. I was really thoroughly enjoying listening to Mona, especially when she was unpacking the idea of how a festival can be so disruptive, can be a space that opens up all sorts of new ideas. And I think that the fact of working with community spaces and public spaces and the people who inhabit them and who can be encouraged to visit them really allows that kind of exciting range of possibilities, and I was feeling quite envious, I have to tell you. The festival that I've been working with for the last several years, 8, 9, 10 years, is the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival. And it is definitely a festival in the art space, but the focus is on books, it's on ideas, it's on conversations, it's on literature, rather than actually moving into activity, which is a hands on kind of activity, which Mona's festival does. So we're thinking about this concept of diversity and inclusion, and we're thinking about this concept of arts and the arts festival.
And my whole point of entry for this was that what is the is there a deep connection, or should there be a deep connection between when we think of the arts and we think of literature and books and the whole concept of diversity and inclusion? Is there a natural organic connection there? And I feel that in a way, if we if we remove diversity and inclusion from the art space, then it's like removing the lifeblood of the arts. I think that the connection is so deep that it is actually absolutely really running like blood in the veins of the art space. Or why do we say this? Entering, what do the arts do for us? I mean, would anybody like to answer this question? What do the arts mean? What is literature, reading, looking at something that you see on the screen, exploring something that you walk into or that it has a visual impact on you? What does it do? Triggers the imagination? Yes. Sorry? Yes. Okay, expression, communication, fosters empathy. So, and sorry, celebrates emotions, yes, and certainly puts emphasis back on emotion and feeling and response and responsiveness. So, everything that we've talked about here has been a question of connection, a connection between me, myself, and another person. If you can call that other person the other, as we so often do, or the rest of the world. It could be the natural world, it could be the human world. And so it's a question of either entering new worlds of imagination or seeing your old world in a fresh way. We often say that the arts teach you to look differently. Suddenly you stop and you notice and you think differently about things that are so familiar and so sort of everyday. So it's a way of shaking you into something new, into a new kind of connection, which is again about diversity, something fresh that's come into your life, about inclusion, about bringing in something into your life. You've got multiplicity, you've got words like surprise, the surprise that you get when you are involved with a work of art moves you, sense of discovery, the word empathy has already been used, invention, creativity, reinvention. So these are all sort of basic aspects I would feel of literature and the arts. And therefore, when one is programming for a festival, when one is planning and trying to think of what we would like to present and what we would like to reach out to and how would we like our audiences to experience this festival, the idea of inclusion and diversity becomes absolutely central, at least to the way me and my colleagues think about it. So, what are the kinds of now we started off by talking about disability, and I think disability remains a very crucial area, which a lot of public spaces in India, government and otherwise, just do not engage sufficiently with. So that is one whole area that we started talking about, and Siddharth is going to return to after I finish. So, apart from that area of inclusion, there are lots, as Deepti had said, there are lots of other areas that we don't always think of including. So I was trying to look at the different aspects of inclusivity and diversity that we pay attention to when we program very consciously. For example, social segments, different areas of society, voices that are not normally heard, voices that are often silenced, whether these are voices of different genders, different stratas of society, talking about experiences outside the mainstream, talking about experiences outside the urban experience, children's voices, people who are reaching out to children. Children are not often always included in these festivals. Then there's a question of geographical involvement, geographical inclusion. Areas like the Northeast, which need to be looked at because the culture, and in some ways, they're very isolated from us. Okay, not everybody really knows too much about what goes on in the Northeast in terms of their rich arts and culture, world, their literature, their writing. So bringing in connections with areas of India that are not easily accessible. also areas of the subcontinent linking up. So whether you have our neighbors, whether it's Bangladesh, it's Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, bringing in those kinds of connections which we've tried to do. Opening up the festival to other countries, Asia, Europe, again, trying to find links, trying to find commonalities. Some of the slides I'll show you will show some of those programs to show how all this theory transforms into practice. Translation, major source of diversity inclusion for us. Translation as an idea, as a concept, what are the issues of translation, what are the politics of translation. Translation becomes key to our ability to access other experiences and culture. They attempt to include other languages into the festival. So, although it's primarily an English language festival, we do always try to include Hindi. We initially started off by including Bengali sessions. Now we have a whole separate festival for Bengali literature, which is just finished. That's a 2 day festival. Then the concept of including burning issues. We've had sessions on Me Too, on looking at the whole concept. How is it playing out? Where is it coming from? Who is suffering for all this? Who is so discussing it? So opening it up, whether it's the concept of issues that are really important to us right now, citizenship. What is citizenship? Who's a citizen? When you become a citizen? When you stop being a citizen? Free speech, dissent. These are all important burning issues in the last year, couple of years, I would say, which have worked themselves very importantly into the festival programming. And then I would include different genres. For example, it's very easy to think of a literary festival as full of this. Very often I get told that, but this is not literature. It may not be literature, but it's ideas, it's concepts, it's life experience. So, of course, we include things like poetry, which very often gets sidelined. We have a very important whole section of the festival called Poetry Cafe, which is focused completely on poetry, and especially encouraging new voices in poetry to come in. So there's history, there's current affairs, there's graphic literature, there's slam poetry. We try to continuously bring in new areas and new genres which may not have been traditionally included in the festival earlier. All the arts, there will always be discussion on, because we feel that there's a symbiotic connection between literature and all the arts. Um, you can't conceive of any of the arts, visual, performing, without the world of literature alongside it, and vice versa. So there's a lot of emphasis on that as well. And of always, the basic approach has always been that this is a free, open to all, absolutely public access festival. So, what does that mean? That means you try and reach to use spaces which people are comfortable being part of, comfortable walking into. So, a lot of of course, there's the bookstore, the Oxford bookstore, which is sort of the hub and the mothership of the festival. But the bookstore is also a public space for everybody to use. But apart from that, we've tried to use public spaces in the city, like the Victoria Memorial, which now, of course, has its own festival also, the National Library, St. John's Church. I mean, all over, studied all over the city, we try to open up these spaces and turn them into spaces of encounter and conversation, similar to what Mona's been doing as well. So I'd like to now move into just very quickly taking you through some of the actual events that we've had. This for you to see. This was an attempt to bring together Asian writers from across different countries to talk about image identity and how the Asian woman is associated with these in the literature of their countries. This was about cultural heritage and contemporary India. Again, you'll notice that we tried to partner, like Veena was talking about how important collaboration and partnership is. So we've tried to partner with other institutions in the country. The concept was trying to link literature and society with the intangible and tangible sort of heritage of the country. This session was called Literary Commons, Indigenous Literatures. So we had participants from Australia and different writers from the Northeast talking about the idea of a literary commons. This is completely focused on new voices in fiction, new writers. They're not necessarily established or well-known names. This was a volume that was came out of writings in our traditional literatures and also contemporary literatures, which look at the prostituted, the so-called prostituted woman. This was about women in popular media, in the big screen, who are figures who have tried to break through the normal accepted sort of image or representation of women who crossed the line in some way. This was a session on people who are writing from, again, non-mainstream perspectives. This is the meet, mentioned the Me Too crisis already to you. This was when it was really sort of at its peak at the um, beginning of this year when we took it on. And it was a very, very controversial discussion, lots of different points of view coming out. This was the session that I just wanted to include this. This was on books for children. How do you begin the process of gender sensitization from a younger age for people who are writing to children? This was a session dedicated to Northeast writers, people who are trying to make a difference in their society, talking about the kind of issues that they deal with. Hindi, this was one of our Hindi sessions. How does Hindi relate with the other Indian languages? Is it becoming a hegemonic presence like English is accused of becoming in India? This was an interesting talk. We've associated with a prize for young women writers. Young is a very relative term. We prefer to use the word new because very often these young women are not that young by the time they get around to writing their first or second book. But this is an award that we are giving every year for freshly arrived writers, women writers in different genres. The first round was creative fiction, and the second round has been real life stories. So biographies, diaries, autobiographies. And these are just a few general glimpses. This is Poetry Cafe happening, and also to say that we don't just stick to the time of the 3 days of the festival, but through the bookstore, continue the different attempts at having conversations and discussions around these issues. So that carries on throughout the year. And that, in addition to the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival, which will be on in January 17th to 19th next year, I've also started curating this festival in Shantiniketan, which is again a space which has a huge potential for rediscovering itself as a place of conversations and dialogue in the arts. And Shantiniketan is a place that's always had a very natural connect with the natural world, with the world of crafts, with the world of with the environment. So this festival is bilingual. It's at the moment just a weekend festival, but once again the aim is to make it really a small but meaningful interchange for people who are exploring different kinds of concepts and ideas in the field of literature, arts, and uh, and the environmental sustainability. So those are just to give you a sort of very brief overview of how one can think of including different kinds of diversity within arts programming for festivals. Thank you very much. 29th of February and 1st of March. It's a weekend, Saturday, Sunday.
Thank you, Anjumdi, for opening up um, perspectives on what are the different conversations we can have. I'd like to talk about that a bit more about how do you have these difficult conversations like Me Too, and how festivals like Sumona mentioned, how can they set the context to have a difficult conversation and then use arts as a vehicle really to facilitate something that is could otherwise be quite uncomfortable. So hopefully, we'll talk about that as well. Our third speaker for this evening is no stranger to KCC, as Reena mentioned, Siddhant Shah is the founder of Access for All. He is a TEDx speaker, a heritage architect, and a universal design expert. Siddhant specializes in bridging the gap between cultural heritage and disability. He works with corporate CSR and inclusive leadership training, museums, art festivals, art galleries, and cultural heritage sites to make them more accessible through access audits, educational and multisensory experiential activities, focusing on kids, senior citizens, as well as special needs audiences, and through providing accessible infrastructure. Access for All has successfully collaborated and consulted on cultural and corporate accessibility and projects in India, in Malaysia, China, Pakistan, as well as in Spain. Siddhant was a speed mentor for the British Museum's ITP Plus event and was selected for the Tate Intensive at the Tate Modern. Siddhant and I met at the Serendipity Arts Festival in Goa last year, where he helped them curate or was instrumental in helping them curate the Senses program. And I'm sure he will tell us a little bit more about that, as well as, I believe, if I may burst your little surprise, he's got something really fun for us. So, Siddhant?
were wondering what I was doing. Why was I talking in sign language? Why was I telling you hi, I'm Siddhant Shah? We're in the space for inclusion, right? Imagine if there's somebody who's hearing impaired and walks in, can he or she understand what we're talking? So are we really talking about inclusion? A lot of thoughts, a lot of things to think about when you look at the aspect of inclusion and what exactly is the true essence of inclusion, and that is what my topic is, what I'll be talking about. We've spoken about what we do through a practice of in Access for All. It's a consultancy where we work with museums, art galleries, even with corporates now, in making their spaces more accessible, their HR policies more inclusive and diverse, and having all sorts of events, art festivals more inclusive. Serendipity Arts Festival is our ongoing program where that was the first program where accessibility, inclusion, diversity was in the inception rather than a retrofit. We did not make a toilet and then were thinking where to put the ramp so that everybody could go in. But the idea was that where we met and where she was doing the impact assessment of that program about how accessibility changes the way people also engage in the space and how accessibility is not a burden. Like, so breaking various myths, and I'll be talking about that. I'm actually talking in KCC, which is again one of our sites where we are consulting, and so various things came into this place. My background is in architecture. While I was studying architecture, I was like thinking of being working with one big builder. I come from a hardcore Gujju family. They all wanted लड़का builder के साथ काम करे, बहुत सारा पैसा कमाए, शेयर बाजार में डालो. But their dreams were shattered. They were like, "Arey, he's getting into heritage." And while I was studying in the third year, my mother acquired visual impairment, and suddenly the dynamics change. We stopped traveling for first 3 years when she acquired visual impairment. Things change, perspective of society changes towards you. And my biggest concern of my grandmother was that मेरे पोते का शादी कैसे करेंगे. She thought that how what would people think? Arey, so why would somebody give a daughter to a blind or a visually impaired mother-in-law? It must be a continuous thing in the family. Genes में आता होगा, क्या होता होगा? So it just goes to show about it. Only what my one family of 9 members thought about disability. Imagine what all we think about disability. And that became a calling. I won a competition for UNESCO and ASI to make World Heritage Sites in India accessible and disabled friendly. I then got a scholarship to go and study in Greece. I did my master's over there, where I got a chance to explore museums and cultural spaces in the perspective of accessibility only. That is what my focus was. And then I came back to work with my first project, which was at the City Palace in Jaipur, to create cultural prototypes for accessibility and thus making City Palace one of the first organizations, first museums to be accessible for people with varied disabilities. I'm gonna just pass this around to you all. Can you need to write one word? You all have a pen with you? Yes, no. If you don't have, we have some sketch pens also, so we can pass that also. Everybody has a pen. Needs a pen. Needs. On one side, you need to write what does inclusion mean to you, and on the other side, you need to write what does exclusion mean to you. You have exactly 30 seconds. Don't think much. The first word that comes into your mind when you hear the word inclusion, and what's the first word that comes into your mind when you think of the word exclusion? Do we have enough paper? Otherwise, we have paper also. Fine? Everybody got it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, this is okay. First word that comes into your mind when I say inclusion, and the second word when I say exclusion. 15 seconds more. 10 seconds. Done. Stop. Yeah, right? Okay, continue. I'm just making this more seem like a competition. Stop. Start. Okay? Yes, you all have your word. Okay. I'm going to ask you all about that word as in how we go. So my presentation is going to tell you about what does inclusion mean for us and how do we look at it. And then we will use this during the discussion part. But before we start, I'm just going to pick up random three people and ask them what does inclusion and exclusion mean for you. So one word. Welcome. Exclusion. Everything. Sir. Aggression. Okay. Ma'am. No. Okay. Perfect. This is what we feel. There should not be like by my everybody has a career aim. You all have a career aim in whatever you all are doing. You want to be the best in the thing. My aim is that I should not have any clients. It needs to be a world where everything is inclusive and we should not be hired by people to come make our space more inclusive or accessible. That is what our idea is, and that is exactly what we feel that my mother, when she acquired disability, we did not go all the way out like, "Arey, nahi, nahi, change this, take it." She was part of us. She was just part of us, and we made sure that certain adjustments were made so that she could be included into it. We did not have to think of her that, oh, suddenly abhi kya hoga, exclusion hoga, and that is the true essence of what we feel. And the whole presentation that I'm going to make for next 15 minutes is about in between the first slide and the last slide, which is that there is no need of inclusion if there is no exclusion, right? If we do not, if I put a board outside that only those wearing red color shirt or t-shirt or a red color garment can come in, then I'm saying that then rest of all except for one, two, three, four people, you all are excluded, right? But if I don't make that demarcation that anybody and everybody can be a part of it, and that is what we go about. We just when you see our work, it seems that बहुत technical होता है, but actually speaking, inclusion is all about logic and using logical reasoning in making spaces more accessible and open for all. That's my mother, where it all began. And the whole idea of how to exclude the need of making one person feel more included in a space. It's actually like the first thing that I hate about inclusion and about our work is that we sit down to segregate. That should not happen. Why are we segregating in order to include people? That so it's constantly those things that we have to fight. We have to create sensitization, we have to create awareness and then approach that issue. And our focus, as what both the speakers before me spoke about, they spoke about different realms of inclusion. Our focus is persons with disability, is looking at accessibility in the aspects of disability, and then looking at disability physically, intellectually, and socially. We feel this is how it begins, right? It may sound as बहुत philosophy झाड़ रहा है ये क्या बोल रहा है. I'm actually half the age of her academic career. So, like, we are 6 years old, but we've been working. We're one of the youngest national award winners on this. We've received the Equal Opportunity Award through Nippon Foundation, which is the Microsoft Equal Opportunity Award, and that's because we've been doing something right in our space and with rigor. And we feel this is how any organization, any festival can be made more accessible. How many of you wear glasses? Raise your hand. पूरा पूरा आधा ग्लास नहीं पहनते ना पूरा ग्लास. Okay. How many of you have your disability card with you? Aren't you all persons with disability? Why? You all need to have a legit disability proof, right? You all fall under disability. नहीं? ऐसे दिल पे हाथ रखे बोलो सर. ऐसे ऐसे. Would you be happy if I told you that, ma'am, you're wearing glasses, you're a person with disability? You should have. Then why does somebody who wear a hearing aid, the person who wears a hearing aid, has to identify as a person with disability? It does the same thing, right? This does the same thing versus what this does. I can't see clearly, that's why I wear this. I can't hear clearly, that's why I wear that. Yes? But still, our perception is that this is okay. It's so normal, you know? Like how you all were like, sir was like, no, why should I have a disability card? I'm just wearing glasses, right? Same way, that person should also be able to say that why should I have a tag of a person with disability? I'm just wearing a hearing aid because I can't hear clearly. So it goes into that aspect of a society. How do we perceive disability? And that's why this is my generic question. Every time she knows, wherever I go, this is my first question I ask people. And this is where the first myth breaks that no matter what, we are all special in certain ways. Like even if I'm wearing this, if I remove this, I can't see. So that means that is a form of disability. Inclusion is about even dignity, right? Imagine being lifted in a place where you don't have lifts. Imagine being you're going on that ma'am is actually going through what you have a desert safari. फुल बॉडी मूवमेंट हो जाता है उनका पूरा वो दिन का फिजियोथेरेपी हो गया जस्ट वॉकिंग ऑन दैट पार्ट. It is about dignity that why can you not provide certain spaces that need to be for them? Why can you चलेगा यार 2 steps पे उठा लेंगे. I was asked to give a TEDx talk in one of the schools and the school says we are inclusive school, we have everything, the ramp is there, this is there. The stage only was not inclusive. So when I asked the principal, but it is only 2 steps, we can lift them up. So it is not about that you can lift them 7 floors also and bring them up, but the idea is about dignity. That if you are bringing them into your space, you need to have the right facilities. That's why if you see on an airport, you see a space where you will find a lift, you will find the staircase, and you will find an escalator. It is your choice that you make what to use. And accessibility and inclusion is about that we need to provide the right infrastructure. It is their choice if they want to come into the space or not. It is a duty of organization of KCC to provide tactile artworks. It is the choice of the visually impaired person to come in or not, and that is what is very important. That it is their dignity, it is their choice. Since we have provided tactile artworks, it does not mean that they constantly have to come in the space and be that. It is like not everybody loves history, right? Then why should I pull them into a museum? If you must be remembering at least one museum trip you made in a school, and you're saying like, "क्या boring है यार ये क्या है इतना boring कौन?" Because not everybody likes that, right? If you are an accountant, if I give you a science bio paper to write, you're like, but I don't like that, right? So you need, as an organization, accessibility has to be infrastructure. You need to provide for that. That is your duty. But to use that or not, that is the choice of the user. And more than anything, we realize that through our audience research, ramps are used way more than by parents, mothers with strollers and on prams than with persons on a wheelchair. So it is extremely important. We cannot just assume that there are only these people who only a person on a wheelchair needs accessibility. Every accessibility is at various levels that you need. Inclusion, again talking about, we believe in one thing which is like not doing anything for them without them. Our team is of 4 people, including my mother who is visually impaired. There are 2 other people who work with us who are hearing impaired and with intellectual disability. The idea is that we realized when we started working, my first art exhibition at India Art Fair, where for one of the galleries, we created tactile artworks, and we created artworks in the format of 6 inch by 6 inch. Brilliant first show. A lot of people came, a lot of people wrote, a lot of press wrote about it. But this one girl who was visually impaired, she came and she asked me, भैया एक क्वेश्चन पूछना मैं पूछूं and I was like हाँ प्लीज पूछिए तो शी लाइक मतलब इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि सब आर्टिस्ट एक ही साइज का आर्ट वर्क बनाते हैं क्या because we realized that we were creating tactile artworks. We thought we knew everything. Let's create tactile artwork and make the art gallery, art space more inclusive. That one question made me realize that that was my failure in this space. Since then, since that day, we have been constantly working. All the braille books that we write, they are all proofread. We have the visually impaired people. We are all our tactile artworks. Whatever you saw, whatever you will even see in KCC, has been checked, vetted by people, by blind schools in Bombay where we work, where we create these things. And once we get their approval, no, change this, add this element, put the braille text here, we get them. And still, we this time also, while we had something when we had the show here, we got a brilliant feedback from one of the persons over here. Said that you have braille in the artwork. Next time, if you can even put an arrow that would lead us to the main object that has a braille label, that would be more than helpful. So we are constantly learning, and we are not ashamed of telling that we failed in that particular thing, and we don't have a textbook to follow. So our experiences, our work is our textbook, and we're constantly working to make it better and better every time. As I said, the idea of no segregation, right? If I in this room, in any room, if I just put one WC, anybody and everybody can use that. It is only when I put that signage that male, then other females have to wait outside. If I put signage of female, then males have to wait outside. Then if somebody who does not want to identify as a gender, their gender, where do they go? Then do you put third gender, something like that? Why not have spaces which can be open for all? Like it's a washroom, everybody can be able, should be able to use it. You need to have a WC, you need to have a bidet, you have a urinal, and let people use as and how they want. So that is one problem of inclusion. That in inclusion, to make the spaces more inclusive, we are segregating the audience rather than bringing them together and providing easily. Otherwise, imagine if I have to provide for all four, I need to provide four toilets, but I can have one large toilet enough for everyone to use. Inclusion also means the idea of easy access into the site. So this is at the Serendipity Arts Festival. One of the things that we've been fighting for is that visual art is not only for those who can see, right? Everybody, irrespective of their visual impairment, can be a part of it. And that's why all the art, most of the artworks that you see in Serendipity Arts Festival, in Kochi, if you had been at various other museums where we've been working, our aim is to at least provide three assistive products over there. One which is a tactile artwork. Right next to it, you see the braille caption. So the same caption that talks about the artwork, there is a braille caption for that, and there's an audio descriptive guide available with sign language visuals in that. So that no matter what, whichever at least your first concern is addressed, then you move into the second part. So that is what the representation of the artwork was. It even tells them what is a print. So in order to understand where the edition number is written, what is the title of the artwork, where is the the artist name put, and then we constantly even curate these works where initially this is the it's in its fourth year. In the first year we had to push like we had to really ask schools to please come. I don't have the graphics here. We are in the fourth year. In the first year we did only for 4 days of the festival. This time we've been doing workshop sessions for the 6 months before and after, like 3 months before and 3 months after the art festival. So that was the impact. Then now we're getting people asking us that can you come to the schools and do the workshops. Now we get calls before that, please book our this slot before that slot gets filled. So where we had 45 people visit, people with disabilities visit Serendipity Arts Festival in the first year. Today we have over 300 plus people who've already been part of the workshop, and the festival is still yet to, is going to happen. So for 8 days we have 8 special needs schools lined up, and throughout the day, we earlier we used to do only for 1 hour. This time we have one whole for 8 days dedicated slots starting at 10 a.m. and ending at 6 p.m. So we this was the impact that we created by providing the facilities. Because this time they said that we asked them, random people in the second year started coming. Third year, we had walk-ins and we are like, how did you know? They're like, we got to know through newspapers. We got to know through our friends that these facilities are there. Why don't you take your kid over there? So that is what you need to do as a festival, as an organization. You need to provide these facilities. People will automatically come and be part of your thing, and then automatically your festival will become inclusive. We even do sensitization programs where it's important to create awareness, and we start with schools, we do with corporates, we even put, this is at Standard Chartered, where we put like key executives, top senior executives, with the team of specially people from their team, and there's a session that we work with different CSR and corporates, which is under the context of inclusive leadership practices, and how do you create your leadership to be more inclusive. This was, and what we feel as inclusion is about taking the first step, starting with it. And this is at the City Palace, Jaipur, where the first Braille book was created. Seeing the repercussions, the impact, we that's the tactile artwork that you can see, so you can feel and understand what you're reading about. Seeing that, we were invited, so we consult with Bukuru also, which is a children's literature arts festival, and we've been working with them on providing accessibility elements into the literature festival. When we were invited actually to Kuching in Malaysia, this happened in Sarawak Public Library, and the library was asking us that since you're coming, why don't you add to the library that we have? And they have a brilliant Braille library. They're like, we have, but we have nothing from India. So we actually created what you see in their hand is the touch and feel book on Indian art, which is the first of its kind, where five artworks. So what we did was, it was a very participatory thing. Before creating the book, we created a list of all different types of traditional Indian art forms that was sent across to them, basis which what they like, the kind of animation, the kind of the form, style, something that they could connect with. They told us what they wanted. So five artworks were selected: Gond, Madhubani, block printing, Wali, and one and dealer, basis which so you see tactile representation of that, and what that art form means, what is it, where it is practiced, in which part of India that was created, and then it was distributed to them. And then there's another section which was kept in the library. So you have to start. Once people know that these things are available, they will ask for it. But if you don't provide for it, how will they know? Then हाँ हम नहीं जाते क्योंकि वहाँ पे कुछ नहीं है. But now that we were shocked when somebody that the blind kids came to, when they came here on 27th, when we began the first part of the Sparsh Drishti project at KCC, when they came in here, they're like, for the first time we are going to an art gallery, because we were never, otherwise we were told that ये सब आप क्या देखोगे, कुछ आपके लिए देखने के लिए नहीं है. बट आपने बुलाया क्योंकि हम यहाँ पे आके टच कर सकते हैं, बाकी तो हमको कोई टच भी नहीं करने देता है. वो पहले बोलते प्लीज डू नॉट टच रादर. सो we constantly break those notions, and that is how we got them to even be part of the program. So this was the one that we did for the State Bank Museum in Karachi. That was the first project that we did. This is one of the first Braille books with tactile artwork in Pakistan. It was launched by the governor on 14th August 2016 over there. And again, it talks about the entire numismatic collection of Pakistan, starting from Indus Valley seals to the current currency, the banknotes that are there. So, in the nutshell, this is what we've been doing. Access for All aims at pushing the boundaries of physical, intellectual, and social access. And that's we say innovative and indigenous, because when we began working with it, we did not have the money to go directly 3D printing. 3D printing is the cheapest solution available, but when it comes to budget, it was the most expensive thing. So we had to figure out our own ways, work with the craftsmen, because we have culture of using three-dimensional things in our life. So we had to figure out how we could use that, how we could create our tactile models, our braille, tactile images with using all these different elements. And then that's why indigenous way is the most important thing. And what we really feel is that accessibility is about the right experience. Imagine if I told you that those who are wearing black colored, anything of black color, their shoes, eyes, the chashma, could be black color, will have to listen to the presentation from outside, right? It is not the same experience of sitting here and listening to the presentation versus sitting there and listening to the presentation. Everywhere where you are positioned, that creates a different experience for you. So the idea is to broaden the bracket as much as you can. And second, and the most important thing to realize is that accessibility is an incremental process. You cannot go today, अभी में हम सब accessible कर देंगे. That cannot happen. That's why when we started working with KCC also, what Dina said was very true. Like, she was asked that कितना accessibility कर सकते हैं बताओ हम, and we listed down each and everything, and for that to happen it would at least take minimum of 5 years. But then they realized that if we have to start, we have to start with step one. And that could even start with just providing the right signage that we have a ramp, please come and use. If I put a ramp but nobody knows, there is no way of. So that is even like, so that's just an example about the incremental process of accessibility. These are things that we've been doing, and these are the kind of audiences that we've been constantly catering to. And this is one of the maps that we created for India Art Fair, where so in the map, things that are to be provided and what all we also consider in accessibility is having simple thing like a nursing room. Parents, like mothers come, where would they feed? Like we've seen people feed under a soffit in the washroom. Those are not, you cannot poo and eat in the same place, right? The kids cannot be fed in a washroom. It needs hygienic clean spaces. So that also goes into the element of spaces, ramp access wherever. So this map was provided so that anybody who would come in knew where what was there. And then for those who are visually impaired, a tactile map was provided so that they could easily understand. And similar, a tactile map was there on site and even in their braille book. So just to come to the last part where I said that my mother was never included into the her friends or society because she was one of us. She was part of us, and we made sure that there were facilities that were there, like so that if we had to order, like one of the biggest problem that we faced in the restaurant was that when she acquired visual impairment, she could not eat with a fork for the longest time because that would eat the, like she wouldn't. Suddenly imagine eating with a fork when your eyes are closed. You will be freaking out. मेरे को कहीं पे कहाँ पे लग जाएगा. And then we had to change multiple things. We had to go on market looking for the a fork for a kid which has a blunt edge versus various different things. And we had to carry cutlery. We've carried our cutlery when we would go to hotels. Like sometimes she doesn't know and she is dropped and we were told off by the hotel that please leave. Like ये क्या है? And then when they realize that oh there's a अच्छा अंधे है, sorry. But andhe should not come. That idea of sympathy should not come. It should be an empathetic practice that accidents happen, right? So how do you change it? And it goes on constantly. That that if you make people part of your living, that is when it can be truly inclusive. Thank you so much, guys. Before we just one thing to show you. Since we have been talking about festivals, you this is Durga Puja, right? नहीं, Durga Puja, right? एक मिनट मैंने खाली pause किया. You think our festivals, when we talk about inclusion and diversity in our festivals, just look back and understand how inclusive our festival is. Of course, if you may not be able to reach a site or something, that is one part, but the essence of the festival, that it's extremely multisensory. So even if one of your senses is not there, you can still participate in that. Like Durga Puja, you can experience with your eyes. It's a visual treat. It's a oral. It's a, like you can hear so much. It's an experience for your ears. You touch. There's things that are put up. You wear different clothes on that time. You smell so much, and even the best part that you take something to eat with your. So all your senses. If you really want to make anything more accessible, inclusive, diverse, make it a multi-sensorial experience, and automatically everything will be inclusive because it is where of course they cannot come inside, but automatically if you don't, you can't see, you can hear so much. You can see but you can't hear. There's so much for you to do. So if you engage all your senses, automatically things become inclusive. And this is just one thing to show you. नहीं आ रहा. I don't know how many of you know of this project. It was done through MP Billas, their CS part of their outreach. And it was a project, how do you make puja accessible for those with visual impairment? And we did something in the school. It was a 2 day festival where they were 2 day thing where they were asked to come in and interpret what is puja for them.
রেডিওয়ে যখন ছুটির বাদ্যি বাজে, শিউলির গন্ধে চারপাশ যেন নতুন আনন্দে সাজে। অপেক্ষার আবার হবে অবসান, নয়ন মেলে দেখবে মাকে, মাথবে পুজোয় প্রাণ। উৎসবের এই কলতানে কেউ কেউ শুধু মনের জানলা দিয়েই আনন্দ অনুভব করে। কত গল্পকথা, কত কিছু করতে চাওয়া। কে বলেছে দৃষ্টি ছাড়া ভাবনা আসে না? এই ভাবনাগুলোকে আরো মজবুত করে তুলে ধরতে ওদের চোখে পুজো।
So the first experience was tell us all about puja through all your other senses except vision. And then they created tactile renditions of what was their idea. Somebody said about decoration, somebody spoke about weapons.
এই সবই ওরা ওদের মতো করে তুলে ধরলো নানান ভাবে।
This is exactly what Sumona was saying. It is about festival, it is about doing things what you like rather than. So we let them do what they felt rather than guiding them beforehand that what Durga Puja is, क्या होता है, क्या होता है, आपको क्या लगता है? That was the first question we asked them. So based on what all things they created, we created a tactile rendition of that, like of the pujo for them on the wall. These are parents of the kids. One person said we just want to play with that. कुछ आवाज आते लेकिन उनको मालूम नहीं था what was that instrument. So we actually even got the what Thak players to come and they just wanted to play it on their own. So they taught them how to play in that beat. So every sense was introduced. So that's they're showing whatever was inspired from their art also with the sound. And that's
অন্ধকারে মজবুত ইমারত, এই অন্ধকারে মিলবে মোদের পরিচিতি, অন্ধকারে গড়ব নতুন জগৎ।
Thank you very much, Siddhant. I know that when we spoke in Bangalore as well, Siddhant was one of our speakers when we did this same session in Bangalore a couple of weeks ago. And I remember that the little bit that he did about if you wear glasses, do you have a disability? I thought that was very, very powerful. It really opened up my mind to how we think about what disability means to us in an everyday context. So if you'll bear with us for just a little while, we are setting up for the panel discussion. And I'd like to invite all of our speakers, Sumona, Anjum, Siddhant, to please grab a seat, and I will to make this a very comprehensive session, because the topic is so large, it's impossible. So I want to acknowledge that. It is incremental, yes, exactly. So I want to acknowledge that at the beginning of this session, that there are going to be many, many aspects that we will try to cover, but probably just touch upon. So to keep that in mind as well. The second is that I will myself apologize if I were to say something or bring in a perspective that might require more learning, because I myself as an individual am learning more about how to talk about disability, how to talk about inclusion, and what are the different perspectives we need to bring in as arts professionals. And the third is, what we're keen on with these sessions is to have all of us end this session with some sort of takeaways. What are some ideas that we can, as for three people sitting here on this side of the room, and then what are the perspectives, what are the takeaways that you as an audience can bring in questions that you can ask this particular panel. So takeaways is something that I'm very keen on so that it's a conversation, but then hopefully some sort of action points. So I will begin this discussion by asking. This is really something for all three of you. Um, we talked about festivals, and this is something that I also mentioned, Sumona. Festivals as spaces where we can invite in communities as platforms, really, and this is something that Anjum, you also spoke about. In our Bangalore session, a Ravani art project is an art collective that's based in Bangalore that works with the transgender community. And Purnima was talking about, when she and I were talking before the session, she said something very interesting. She said, um, festivals sometimes represent power, and I believe that is something that came up in presentations as well. So, how is it that we can step back? It's easy for some of us to put together festivals and to run festivals and to invite people and to curate conversations and so on. But how can we step back, really actually invite communities and empower them? How do we empower communities? So I wanted to ask each of you to talk about one broad aspect that everyone in this room or everyone as a cultural professional can address in their own work. What is one thing in thinking about inclusivity that we can all begin to address?
Okay. Yeah, so I think one thing we can all start doing is, I mean, even in the process of developing something, how do you make room? How do you make space for different people who are you typically not in charge of organizing things or curating festivals? How do you, as a curator, as an organizer, open up the space for others to come in and take ownership of that process? I think is, I mean, unless you start with that, no matter what you do at the end of the line in trying to create openness and access, I feel like you fall short. I think that applies to anything like a museum space. How does the programming get curated by a group of diverse people, or a festival? How do you from the beginning try to create a diverse coalition of people who are managing that festival? And I think often that about Hamdasti also. In terms of how do we create a team that's more diverse, include different gender, religion, etc. perspectives, and yeah, so I think that's the first step. And I think all of us who speak, I mean, we all have come from certain, we are here because we are able to do things because we occupy certain positions of privilege. So starting by also recognizing that and what privilege do you have, what power do you have, and how can you share that and make room. And, I think that's also
Sure.
step one.
So I'm going to take building inclusive teams as sort of one takeaway. How can we begin with our own homes, and how can the team then help create?
Yeah, and sometimes we also think about teams in a very conventional way, which you're borrowing from, like how corporates work or NGOs work. Arts festivals, exhibitions always don't have to have a very structured team. But can we think of collectives? Can we think of collaborations? As ways of starting with inclusion from the beginning. I think.
Okay, thank you. Anjumni, what is the one thing that you would say you have been able to address, or you would encourage your team or the festivals and the arts initiatives that you work with? What is the one thing that you would address in talking about diversity and inclusion?
See, I think for me, what's very important to think about is whose voice is not being heard. I mean, we are having, if you're planning something, which is the voice that is not automatically or is not being included, and then to try and listen for that voice and try and bring that voice in. So it could be in any field. If you're working with children's literature, if you're working in the poetry area, if you're looking at fiction, if you're looking at people writing on important issues, what is not part of the discourse, and how do you bring that in?
Lovely. Thank you for that. Siddhant, you've talked about, you of course have talked about teams, your own team as having people with disabilities on there. So I'm going to change the question slightly for you. You've already talked about that aspect. What did you start with? What was one of the first things you start with? Because you talk about inclusivity as a incremental process. What do you often say? Maybe we could start with this and then go from there.
One thing that I learned after a failure in the space was that ask, don't assume. Very, very important. You need to ask them what is because I realized this when somebody I was in the blind school and trying to tell them about a particular bird, ये ऐसा होता है, ये ऐसा होता है, and this professor came and said, why don't you get them to hear the voice of that bird, and they will. It is better to identify. Otherwise, it is all feathers are same. And that time we realized that it is very important to ask the community what you want, like, and that's what any festival where we've been doing. We do this in around what is the area that we have in the radius, what are the special needs schools, what are the communities, NGOs that are working in that space. Ask them, like, have we have created this one very simple feedback prompt to receive the feedback and then start our work rather than doing our work and then asking for the feedback. So that is one thing that I feel, and that is what we start with. That we ask them, basis with what we get, we see where our expertise is, how can we provide for that, and then we provide that.
Thank you. So you've touched upon community, and I want to segue into public spaces, which is again a running thread that I find in all of your work. So public spaces, who do they belong to? Who do they belong to? There's so much historical, political, economic, whatever. There's so many layers and so many contexts. So in India, in the work that you're doing, in the areas that you're working in, um, within this context of who does it belong to, what do you feel is the most urgent need in the public space that needs to be um, talked about? Is it something that the government can address? Is it something that we as individuals within the space can talk about? Are there private institutions? Are there examples of people that you know that you've come across in your work? Or are there specific instances of your own work in public spaces that have helped address a fairly urgent need? So I'm trying to look at the context in which we're operating. What are the broader areas that we need to really look at?
Well, the most public space. I mean, our public spaces have. Okay, so when I'll zoom out a little bit. So when you kind of, I don't want to like create like false dichotomies, but often when you're studying about public art and all, you start with like a very Eurocentric or Western perspective. A lot of art is about activating space. Okay, like it's a dead space, nobody's there, so how do you bring it to life? And I always thought that in India that's always the opposite, because we have like very, I mean, vibrant public spaces. So for us, the notion of public is not to bring people out onto the streets, but within whichever space we have, I mean, even this could be a public space. We look at it as a public domain or a sphere rather than a public space. So it's not about the physicality of it, but it's about who within this space, how much room is there for different people to feel included, to share their voice, for there not to be very clear power structure. So, for example, if we all sat in a circle, it would probably become more of a public space than the way we are sitting now. If everybody had a chance to speak, it would become more of a public space. So how do we create these public domains where people have equal access, have voice, have ownership over that space? I think is a bigger challenge, whether we're looking at it as a room in a gallery or whether we're looking at it as a street corner. But when you're talking about the world outside on the road, definitely we see that, I mean, people with disabilities can never access the space. I had to be on a wheelchair for 3 months once, and I couldn't go anywhere. And women as well. Whenever we put up something, an installation, say on the road, we always find the women just rushing past. Even if they're with their partner, they'll say cholo 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 cholo. Like, we don't pause. We're not comfortable with loitering and relaxing in public space. So even that becomes a challenge when we observe, like gender differences in how we use public space, as we're all also talking about currently with the news. So yeah, so 1.1, any space can become a public space. It's more about how we're engaging with each other. And point, if we're looking at the actual road and the street, there are already there are many hierarchies in who has access, who doesn't. And whenever you're doing something in a public space, you have to be conscious of that and then try to push that and see how can we break those boundaries and limits. So
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to jump to you, Siddhant. Again, public space and disability. What is it in the Indian context right now that is? I know there's so much to unpack, but I'd actually like to say, what is the what what's the positive that's currently happening right now? Is there anything? And I'm taking it out of the arts context.
I have two pictures which can like actually give an answer to you, but I don't know how we can show this.
Okay.
Um, it's actually a picture of a brilliantly done, very inclusive washroom toilet in Rajasthan. So we're talking about this is even like 50 kilometers away from the city center of Jaipur. It's a public Sugam area where it's a toilet area, uh, bath, wash, like toilets, everything. Brilliantly done. It has a perfect ramp, perfect gradient. Everything is perfect. So that's brilliant, right? Things are being done perfectly well. But now let's see the macro picture. Let's step few feet behind, and then you realize that that is on a footpath. So how does the and then you realize there is no entrance to the footpath, and then again you step back, you realize that the footpath थोड़ा और रास्ते से ऊपर है. So the toilet itself, the facility is made perfect, but how do I reach to the facility that nobody sees? Only because in the mandate for the contractor it was told that make washroom accessible, perfectly done. How to reach the washroom, that is your problem, not mine. So the washroom had perfect access, everything, even the doors inside. The latch was also at the at a perfect height where it had to be, but you could not use that because there was no access from the road. So the idea is that you just cannot look at accessibility as a piecemeal thing, that it has to happen in a system. I can make my metro station brilliantly accessible. The Bombay metro station is perfectly accessible for a visually impaired person. There is braille and everything, but the tactile path starts only in the metro station. You have to go all the way for one at that height and then access the tactile pathway. Till that place, you need to figure out your own way, right?
Sure. So that's again, that's the importance of
That is,
context.
yeah. So where I can't just make KCC accessible, right? I need to even make sure that at least if a bus that is wheelchair accessible can actually come right to the entry point of KCC. I can't just ask them now offload, like get off the bus over there, and then you need to walk through that whole cobbled pathway and then come inside. So that is the idea, that I just cannot make my thing accessible. It has to happen in partnership with each other.
Sure.
Integrated.
Integrated. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Anjum, in terms of, okay, while you figure that out, um, literature then is incredibly powerful as lending voice, as um, bringing out stories, really, of communities, of experiences of the human experience, really. And it also is possible where sometimes maybe dance, in terms of infrastructure, is difficult to perform in public space, or music, or several other art forms. But literature can somehow bridge that gap, and I think you've got experience with that as well. You've seen it. You've been able to create that as well. So, how has literature and public space for you um, found that connection? What is it that you're able to do with public space and literature through your work that can help start these difficult conversations?
I think for us, there are challenges as well, because if a public space, literature also needs a degree of silence. It needs a kind of space where people can actually listen and engage. So, trying to do something in a very, very noisy public outdoors area, or trying to do something which involves, say, poetry, or the word in a place where people are rushing by all the time, that is not going to work. So there has to be a question of finding a suitable, a sort of a more, again, I would use the word integrating the content with the setting and what you're trying to do. But having said that, there are plenty of beautiful spaces in the city which are not regularly seen by people as a part of a literary world. They are not even sometimes seen by people, period. They've just been there, and people walk past them without really realizing that they can offer an experience. So when we started using some of the sort of public historical sites in the city for events which were to do with literature, where people would actually stop and sit and or stand and listen, we found that it was adding a dimension of experience to the whole thing. People would come out and say, "Wow, listening to that and in that wonderful surroundings was like something I'll never forget." I remember first time when Victoria Memorial started being used, and the Eastern Quadrangle with its sort of dramatic, surroundings. So people, I mean, that added a whole dimension to the literature, but to the experience. But and I remember something that Mona had once suggested to us, which was I thought it was a fantastic idea, and still wish we could do it, is to create little spaces for books and reading right in the most unexpected places. You remember when we were talking about Park Street, and she said, "Why don't we have these little shelves of books just planted in unexpected places, like a bus stop, or sort of at the entrance to a park, and they're just there, and people can sort of have the option of sitting and reading or engaging with them." So those are some of them. That's Mona for you, because she always thinks about public space and access like that. But those are this combination of a private personal experience and a public space, which is a very interesting dynamic which literature can explore on.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask a third and last question before we open it up to audience questions. Um, Shomona, you mentioned utopic, the word utopic. So, and Siddhant, you mentioned that in an ideal world, I would be, or I'm paraphrasing, that I would be obsolete. So, taking that idea, what is it that in your own line of work, what are you reaching towards? And again, I'm bringing this in the context of takeaways. What is it that our audience here can understand in terms of? So we've had a glimpse of the work that you're currently doing, but what is the trajectory? What is the path that you're following, if there is one, that we can look at and maybe learn a little bit in terms of new perspectives or forward thinking? So, what is your path? What are you working towards in an ideal situation?
I don't know what you can learn from this. I'm not sure it's a takeaway as such, but I mean, with Hamdasti, what we're trying to do is um, create a kind of world where everybody has access to the arts, and art is a part of our everyday life. So whether you whether it's a local library or little bookshop, so there's art everywhere. But again, just putting art everywhere, like public sculptures everywhere, it doesn't talk about access. Similarly, if you just put art in a public space and there are lots of people seeing it, I don't think that's really an authentic artistic experience or encounter, like you were saying, right? So you art is always a moment of connection. I think like what you were also talking about, Anjumanti, that so we need to create art and locate art in places where people can art becomes a kind of focal point for people to connect with each other, to engage with each other, and everybody has access to such moments in their lives, whether it's in their local park or whether it's in their school. So yeah, so that we can have these kind of aesthetic experiences, encounters, moments of connection, empathy, sharing, dialogue, and have these kind of engaged spaces, or whether it's in a public space, whether it's in a gallery, whether it's in a museum, that we can have these kind of moments of engagement through the arts as a part of our daily lives.
Thank you. Alright.
Actually, I mean, I would take that very same idea and apply it to the concept of conversation and dialogue, which, I mean, for me, the ideal experience of a literary festival would be if people came to it, engaged with it, and left having really felt that they had been meaningfully engaged in something. It wasn't just some superficial few minutes of somebody saying something or some totally irrelevant reading, but that they really felt connected, and that somehow that sense of why not just sit at home and read your favorite author? Why go and participate in a festival at all? Is also the sense of community. The fact that you are part of a group of people who have all, sort of engaging in something together, and sort of maybe even sort of feeding off each other's responses and energy. So yes, and for me, the relevance importance of the content would really be important.
Instead of saying something, can I ask it? How many of you feel that the job that you're doing, or you're working, or you are in the position of power? Can you please raise your hand? Okay. Yeah, where you can take the decision. That I just want to know that you are in the position, policy maker, decision maker. You have a team under you. You are a director, or you are a executive. How many of you feel that in the organization, or your own startup, or a setup, or whatever you're doing, if you're teaching, that you are in the position of in power? Okay. And rest of you all think that you all can't do anything. It's like, no, I'm just asking you because what she said, that the takeaway can only happen, and what ma'am really said about that, you, if you go out there, what is that one thing that you can do to make your organization, your institute more inclusive? Even if you just put a post out on Facebook, I'm not saying that. So we are all in the position of power. We don't realize that even one simple post that you put, it's a ripple effect. That what one thing that you would do, there would be 10 other people seeing that. It might be that ninth person of that would think about something, and he is in the position of power to do something and then creates a larger impact. So no matter what, like no matter how small you feel in that organization, or you, like that is what we were telling even at KCC, like the security guard came and told us that why are we getting to do, why are we supposed to sit, आप आ रहे हो आपका presentation में हमको क्यों बिठाना है sir? And we told them that if I came that time, I actually came on a wheelchair, I had broken my foot, and when I came, and I was like, you were the first one to receive me there, right? Reena did not come down to take me on around on a wheelchair. So it is equally important for you to know how to handle somebody on a wheelchair then along with Reena, because she is also an important part of the thing. So no matter what, in which you may think of it as a hierarchy, a pyramid, or whatever structure that you want to think of it, even though somebody at the bottom of it has the power of making that ripple effect and making sure that it can stir up something. Like we've people from British Council here, right? If British Council decides that from next time all our events would have a sign language interpreter, don't you think you would have people with hearing impairment in your audience? Right? It's one thing to start with, right? If you were in a school, if you are a mentor, you're teaching somewhere, you would make sure that you provide for at least one washroom, one toilet in the space, which is a gender neutral thing. That's one thing that you can start with, right? And then automatically people who sync with your thoughts, who resonate with these ideas will come to you. Then that's how things happen, right? But somebody needs to start that, and that is why when I said that inclusion is about taking the first step. And sir, can I ask you to stand up, please? Stand up. Can you open your thoda jacket and show it to them, please?
Nothing
Nothing
changes
changes
if
if
nothing
nothing
changes.
changes, right? So that first change, at least start with that first change. Maybe you will fail and you will learn that you failed in that. And if you succeed, trust me, nothing succeeds like success. Like people will pick up to it. They'll be like, nahi, 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 इन्होंने किया है." Next time you go out somewhere, everybody wrote down your names here, right, on the tag. कितने लोगों ने बांग्ला में नाम लिखा है अपना? Why you should write your name in? Why do we expect that everybody will know Hindi, right, or know English? So that is where language. So it starts at it is inclusion is as simple as writing your name in Bengali and in English and in Hindi, so that anybody that I meet can talk to me. That's the reason why you put that name, right? That automatically writing in English, that means अगर English आता है तो ही मेरे से बात करना, नहीं तो I'm not interested. So that way the takeaways are endless, but that first takeaway is that you need to start. It could be as small as taking your family to a special, taking your son, your grandson, your daughter, your granddaughter to a blind school and telling, and that is how you teach empathy. You cannot teach empathy. बेटा blind आदमी दिखा तो उसको road cross करवाना. And we actually, somebody in the blind school told that that person made me cross the road when I wanted to go straight. So that is the thing, that is what you should not do, right? And there are various ways of starting. So start with something small, and as this man's church says, nothing changes if nothing changes.
And on that note, we're going to open up for questions. What would you like to ask the three people here who have presented their work? What are the thoughts that you have about some of the work that they've presented? Are there points of discussion that you'd like to open up in this room? Kavya can give you the mic if you've got something to say.
Um, Hi, hope everyone can hear me now. Um, right, this question is for Siddham. You said you spoke just now a little earlier about having sign language interpreters at an event. And I was just wondering if we were to integrate that in a program, in any cultural program for that matter, how would we get that word across? Because communication is largely digital. And how would we, I hope, yeah,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
my question.
So
How would we
when you go to any place, right? How do you know that that's the place where you park your car?
there's a sign?
A sign, exactly. So imagine all your digital creatives that go out. It needs to just have that one like it's a wheelchair friendly washroom because you see the wheelchair logo, the symbol out there, right? It's the same way. Like your posters could just have that one line, one statement. So if you see the posters of the maps of India Art Fair has a star saying that all our forum programs are equipped with sign language interpreters, and that's how we were shocked that. And what you're saying, that was the concern with India Art Fair, that no, people will not come. Like, how will they know that there is a sign language interpreter? So we told them that do three things: put a social media post where somebody in sign language, you get them to do a video that hi, welcome, we're going to have sign language interpreter. Put that on all your social media. You figure out which is in your wherever you are doing, which is an organization that is working either specifically for hearing impairment and deafness, or a NGO that is working in that area of disability. You inform them. And third thing is that you put this logo. There is a logo, there is a symbol, universal symbol for sign language. You will see two fingers like that, which will so it means that sign language is there in that space, in that particular thing. And that's how they got to know. And we were shocked because we got an entire group of Chandigarh art students who are hearing impaired, who came to attend the forum because they got to know that sign language was there, because the faculty read on the map that sign language interpreter was there. And that was their first forum. They were like 22-year-old. That was the first art talk that they could attend because it was in sign language. So that's the impact, that you start, the ripple will reach where it has to, but you need to start. And that's the thing, like, as simple as only these logos that you need to do, and the word will spread. You will We do this with Godrej Culture Lab, and in Godrej Culture Lab they have made it as a mandatory practice that they will have a sign language interpreter in Bombay, no matter what, if there is there is not a hearing impaired person in that space. And then they realize that once two came, then five came, then that's when you start that avalanche, right? You need to start that ball rolling, but you need to start with something. So you do these three things. I'm sure maybe first event nobody will turn up, to second event, third event, when you start putting it, there are so many n number of Facebook groups. Sign language, you just write sign language Kolkata and you will see n number of groups that come up. Join them, because that is how, if you really want to get communities together, you will have to take all these initiatives, tag them, send them a message that we are doing that, hi, why don't you come? And then they will automatically spread the word, and then they'll start coming there.
Thank you. Hi, my question is to Sumona. Sumona, while you were talking about, I think it also comes from the practice that my organization is in. We also do a lot of community work, but at the same time, I think we are very aware that we come from a space of privilege, and sometimes just navigating that becomes really difficult. So, if you could just talk a little about how you manage that delicate balance.
Yeah, definitely. I think we often get this question anytime you're working in a space which you don't belong to. You're coming from a position of another. But I think there's no way to there's no way to pretend you don't have that privilege, right? So I mean, obviously I do have that privilege. I have a surname also that gives me privilege, whether I choose to use that or not, so there are many things. I speak Bangla. Some of our artists who don't speak Bangla don't get the same level of acceptance, or there are different ways in which even in our own team we see privilege playing out. Being able to speak English better gives you certain privileges, etc., etc. So whether it's working in a community or in even a space like this, I feel like the privilege plays out. But I think what and each artist has a different way of trying to deal with that. But I think what we try to do, all of us try to do, is take on the position of a jester. I don't know, like being a silly person. Okay, sometimes I feel like if you let go of your expertise or your sense of I know everything, or take me seriously, you take on this role of a lot of people have often told me, you're so pagli mein tor maa baba ki bole, so I feel like at some level you have to be a little mad, and you have to be a little silly, take on the position of the clown who doesn't know, who's just asking questions, is curious. And I think for my practice that helps me. So, and I also try to purposely put myself in positions where I feel a lack of power. So in the police station initially when I started entering, instead of working in a local school, for me it was more interesting to work in a place where maybe I don't feel as much power as I would if I worked in a girls' school in the neighborhood, Or right now the project I'm doing is in Hatkhola Bam Shamiti, which is the bodybuilding club for men. And their whole conversation about how the body needs to be perfect and how your body is your temple. So I try to purposely put myself also in positions where I am not necessarily comfortable, I am awkward, I am silly, I am wrong footed. And I think that's important to do in the work that we're doing.
Hi. So my question is more to is stemmed more from a thought I had, and it's maybe directed to Sumona a little more than the others. I think about space a lot and how that includes and excludes, especially class hierarchies and caste hierarchies within this country and the city, of course. So, say for example, this space. I mean, obviously, it has a certain privilege, and there's some people who will feel comfortable entering, some people who won't. So, I have a work in progress in a piece on Tagorean feminism where I sing songs and I intersperse and interweave global cultural feminism within it. Now, I have wanted to perform that for all castes and all classes as well. And so I have, approached my own community at Udita and I've, asked if I can perform at there in the vernacular for working class people in the houses. And I was categorically said, no, that cannot happen because that will eat into their time and their livelihood. Now, how do you break into a mentality or a thought process like that where they explain their privilege in very economical terms for as if they are doing in terms of in terms of benevolence for classes who don't have as much privilege as you. And so I wanted to understand how you can navigate and how you can approach something like that.
I think what Siddhant said, you start, like, unless you start, you keep trying and you keep trying to find those cracks and you keep trying to find a space inside. I mean, I grew up in Udita, so I know that there was a point where, the people, based on how they look, you have to sign or not. You're allowed to enter based on how you look. So, similarly, we did an exhibition called Art for All at Max Fuller Bhavan, and the group of kids who were a part of that project from Khelo Rugby, they stood outside for half an hour because somebody forgot to tell them how to say Max Fuller Bhavan and pronounce it correctly, and so nobody would let them in. I would just walk in, even if I didn't know where I was going. Nobody would ask me where I was going, but they were stopped to ask where are you going, and they couldn't say it, so they couldn't enter. For half an hour, they were standing on the road. These are like, high school kids on the road on Park Street. So, but the fact is, we still did that exhibition, right? And then after they entered for 3 days, they were in that space and they were like causing riot and they were hanging out in the library. And also, it was very interesting to see that the librarians allowed them to cause riot and touch all the books. So, so it was a challenge and there was a difficulty. And the guards at the gate obviously have been told or have inherited certain ways of, obviously reacting. But you try, you start, and you keep working at it, you keep pushing at the little cracks. So yeah, and the whole thing of not having time, and this is this is really true. They're even as a part of this Max Muller Bhavan project as well. I was talking to the people who do the kind of lifting work, and they sit just on the corner of Park Street. And so I was trying to ask them about, what are the artwork, what are the books, music, songs that you love, that have shaped your thoughts. And they said, where will I've never gone to a movie. These are 40-year-old men working as locksmiths and shoes people fixing shoes, and I mean, it's not surprising they've never gone to a movie. What was even more surprising was when they never listen to music at all. They never watch TV either, because they're all living away from their families, so they literally work all day, go home, eat, sleep. Like, so there's no time in their life for art, and that's also something we have to acknowledge. So as much as I try to bring them into the workshop and invite them, etc., etc., they're unable to provide that time, so then I had to go to them. So then I did my workshop with them on the street, but that's also not enough. Now that I've done the workshop with them, how do I bring them back into the gallery to see what has come out of it? So every step there's a obstacle, but I think, first trying, and second, I guess that's why I work in public space, because then at some point you have to also just go there, do it there, and then maybe slowly it feeds back. So similarly, even in Chitpur, we started working with the kids at Oriental Seminary School. They'd never been to an exhibition or a gallery or even to Jorashako, which is just down the road. But we kept working with them, and then they started entering Max Muller Bhavan or Studio 21, and they came for all the exhibitions. So I don't know. I don't have an answer, but just, I guess what Siddhant was also saying, just to start, and all these buildings and housing complexes is a difficult place to start, I think.
So, since we spoke about time, and the next thing which came to my mind was the money and the economic aspect of things. So, I know in a lot of cases, it's easy to say that, we need to get this, or we need to provide that, but then, or, we need to get people to come. But a lot of times, things could be ticketed because the organization which is organizing it itself needs to raise funds somehow, or it's very expensive for an organization to actually get someone to do sign language, etc. things. So I'm thinking about it more from a logistical point of view, in terms of how can you actually make things happen. I guess sponsorships are, or corporate sponsorships are one option, but other than that, how else can it be done? আর আমরা কি বাংলাতেও ট্রান্সলেট করব কোয়েশ্চেনটা? করতে পারি। আমি অ্যাকচুয়ালি ভাবছিলাম আমি বাংলাতেই কোয়েশ্চেনটা জিজ্ঞেস করব যে আমরা পয়সা যখন নিয়ে ভাবছি যে হ্যাঁ একটা সাইন ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ ইন্টারপ্রেটার লাগবে, বা মানে যদি কোনো ইভেন্ট আছে যেটাতে টিকিট লাগে, তো কেমনি আমরা অন্য কমিউনিটিসদেরকে ইনভলভ করতে পারি, বা এই ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল ব্যাপার নিয়ে আমরা কেমনি এটা প্র্যাকটিক্যালি কি সলিউশন আছে ফাইন্যান্সেসটা ইউজ করে। মাই গড, মাই ভেরি সরি।
Well, you tried. That was good that you actually did. That's a very, very difficult question to ask, because finances, money, sponsorship, this in the arts is a kind of in eternal and integral issue. Everybody who is in a position to spare some money seems to feel that the arts are some sort of peripheral, unimportant, elite, unnecessary sort of activity, and why should we bother, and let's spend the money on something real. He would probably qualify for funding, but maybe Mona and our kind of work wouldn't. But I don't think everything has to be predicated only on finances. And most of the work I've done has been with people who've had little or very little money, and it's more an attitude. It's very often an attitude that this is something important, let's try and do it. Okay, you may not be able to do it in a very fancy or big way, but there is always a way to start, and if the desire is there and if the commitment is there, I find somehow the path opens up. It's a very vague answer and probably unsatisfactory. But even something like sign language, if you're really committed to it, you will find a friend who knows how to do it, and who will agree to come and give you 2 hours of their time to at an event to do. There are sort of ways in which you can somehow try to find a solution. I don't know.
Yeah. So if you really need to get a sign language interpreter, go to a school where they're taught, because they need to do their hours of sign language. It's like dentistry, right? You find dentists who have to work for like over 500 hours in a government hospital. You will find those people and they'll be more than happy to come because you give them a certificate that you've been here for 2 hours and that counts into their post. So you need to find the right synergies where you can fit in. And as she said that it is all about the attitude to start with. Like Access for All it's a it is a for profit organization. We are not a charity, we are not a foundation, but we realized that we did not want to do that because everybody associates disability with charity and we did not want to do that. Plus we got a lot of times that where they would tell us that अरे आपके साथ काम करके ATG नहीं मिलेगा, and we were like, but we believe that we are providing you professional services. And for our first year of accessibility consultations through Access for All, it was a full year of free work that we've done. We've told them that allow us to do, we'll do it complimentary. Don't pay us. Right? If you think that you can at least take care of our travel, just do that. And that is how we started working with organizations to get them to realize that what is an impact accessibility or inclusion can create to your own entity, your property, those kind of things. And approaching the question always from money would not always. I'm being a Guju. I'm telling you that. Trust me. That money is not, it is an extremely. My family thought I was crazy. एक साल के लिए free में कौन काम करता है? But we realized that if we had to tell people what we had to do in India, we lack conceptual knowledge. Trust me, we lack. वो मगर ये नहीं कैसे होगा? जब भी करके दिखाया, then they realize, हाँ, this is possible, and that is how we went through. We realized that everybody thinks that budget for accessibility is too much, नहीं पैसा है, events, we what you see if you Google and you see that if we worked with almost 25 different enterprises, organizations across the country and different places, we've actually written to 100, and that's what you see. And other 75 will blatantly tell us no, that nahi paisa nahi hai. But they don't realize that if you put accessibility as a separate thing, then it is an expense. But if you make sure that you build a toilet and then you add a ramp, it's an expense. But if you had thought of it in conception, ऑटोमेटिकली वो सीमेंट का पैसा सीमेंट में लग जाता, ईट का पैसा ईट में लग जाता, टाइलिंग का पैसा टाइलिंग में लग जाता, right? You're going to make that much in it. And we realize that in order to tell organizations also what is the cost, that if you think of accessibility in inception, it may increase up to 10% of your cost, which is your contingencies के लिए आप ऐसे भी छोड़ दो 10%. But if you do it as an afterthought, you're incurring almost over 35-40% of the cost in creating your spaces accessible. So think of it in inclusion. Start with it. Start with something small, and then go be, then go large. Because a lot of times organizations want accessibility. Let's do everything, and that is very important. And for as a person in that space, and we realize that it was our duty to educate them that don't think of this as a firework thing. Let's do something big. Like a firework, एक बड़ा सा फटाका होगा, प्रेस वाले लिखेंगे very accessible, न्यूज में आएगा, ये होगा, and then you are not. But rather start small, do smaller things, and continue to do it for the longest time. And that's why I feel Serendipity Arts Festival is hats off to them. This started that we want to have a long-term discussion. We want to have a long-term perspective on accessibility. Tell us how to start. And I have very few organizations that ask us that question, that tell us how to start, and that's how we can guide them. So funding is a hindrance, but not so much. Don't worry, you will sail through.
When you were talking about inclusion, you have mentioned visually impaired people and hearing impaired people a lot of times. What is your thought about including people with cerebral palsy or autism, or visually impaired people who want to view a dance performance? Maybe, I mean, have you done anything in that sphere? I'm asking because your suggestion about the sign language, I think it was a very appropriate one. So that's why I'm asking. Do you have any thoughts about these things?
Yeah, sure. So we've done, for example, we've done with the performance, but then you need to understand that some you need to recognize that there is a certain limitation, right? That if somebody who's visual impairment is an umbrella term, we need to realize that all those who are visually impaired does not mean that they cannot see. They're not on the either side. Like there's various levels of visual impairment, and plus the work that we've been doing, we also work with intellectual disabilities, so cerebral palsy, autism, everything falls under that, and that's why spaces, for example, that we work with, like if you see our text, it is completely a sans serif font. Like sans serif font is something. If you see, I guess British Council is also a sans serif font, but the British Museum, that the B, that so a serif is a font type. So if you remove the serif, it becomes an easy font to recognize for everyone. So these are small steps that we take, and that is for intellectual disability. And the reason that intellectual disability does not come in our talk is because it is more in the terms of way we do it, and plus it's an invisible disability. To provide for a visually impaired person, we have to recreate things, we have to make physical things. But for some those with intellectual disability, our approach, our process, the therapists that we bring in, the practitioners that we have in the space of accessibility who conduct the workshop, so it's the practice in which, the process in which they conduct the workshop, that is why that is not seen. But and when you say that, for performances, so this time at Serendipity, if you are there, there's going to be a dance performance, which we've so we got that thing from the blind school, which is NAB, that we are working with in Goa, in Panjim, and they said that we have never been able to experience what performance art is, and luckily it is one of the thing is chow dancers, right, are going to be performing there, and we've set up an entire, before they begin, we're going to have a set of interactive display that is going to be there so that they can actually come in and touch and feel the costume. We've created a braille book on show. So before they've already received the braille book, so they had asked us that before we come there, they need all these things. So they told us that हमको इसके बारे में जानना है, तो आप हमको ये सब details दीजिएगा. Audio descriptive guide was there, music tracks have been provided, and when they come in there, they'll be interacting. Of course, those who are completely blind will not be able to see it, and that is something that you have to accept. But those with low vision, facilities have been made so that they sit in an area through which they can see easily. They are on a raised platform so that the vantage is clear. So all those facilities have been provided, and those kind of things have been incorporated. So once we sit down on it, once we get to know what is the requirement, that's how we can provide for. So that's why, like, various things can be done, but you need to understand the perspectives also of that.
I believe there was a question in the back.
A very good evening. I just wanted to tell something, like the people who were born in 90s, they used to watch Doordarshan. In that, there was some news used to come at 1 p.m. at Sunday, where we had some interpreter who used to do that. But in other news channels, they never used to show that, be it Z TV or Sony. So as a kid, I was very curious, why is it like that, that other channels don't show, only this Doordarshan is showing. Then I came to know that they work on profits and TRPs. If the TRP is good, then only they're going to host that channel. So currently also we don't see any channels who are hosting such kind of news for those people. So as what are you doing, as to take some initiative, where you can speak to some government, maybe anybody to to host such kind of news or something, or is the government really cooperating with you when you are going ahead with your proposal or something?
So for-profit organizations have started. I can tell you the timing also. मेरे पास है. Luckily, thank you for asking that question. I can tell you. एक second, you have to give me. So the broadcast of the news happens at 3:10 p.m. on Samachar Vishesh. It's Samach. So all the news channels have come together. I don't know who all, but as per the message that I have received, news channels have come together that from 3:10 till 3:30, the news will be shown in sign language.
Okay.
So the concern that you have is that it also depends on what time you are seeing the news, right?
Yes, yes.
So
But not about the
and if you see another thing, so they have even started doing that on YouTube. So say for example, if anybody misses that time slot, and but they can actually use YouTube to see the news in sign language. So that is there. And plus now, so a lot of things are going under the in under the segment of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, right? So they are even looking at movies, for example. How do you make as a thing? It is in process to make that any movie that you make should have AD, which is audio descriptive guide, that it can be used for a visually impaired person. So it's a separate plugin, so you can play that. So various different initiatives are on. There are things that are happening in place. As I said, I may not have the answers for everything, but luckily for you, I have an answer that is there. So
and these things can be added in the CSR activities for companies, basically.
yes, you can. So if you, it depends on what perspective, how you're taking, what perspective. What you see over here, what I showed you, the video for MP Birla Cement was actually not their CSR, but it was as an initiative they wanted to take it up. So there's, it depends also from organization to organization. How do they want to take it up? Do they want to show this as a social thing, or they're not realizing that by not providing sign language, you're missing out on TRP because there's nothing available for that audience. If you provide, then automatically everybody will be hooked onto you, right? So that is the way of looking at it. That you create the need for an audience who is in a void, like who does not have anything to do.
Mhm. I think we have time for one more question.
Hello, good evening. My question to all of three of you is how about learning new skills for these visually disabled people or visually hearing impairment and all these people? Have you faced any challenges or are you thinking in these areas? How can we empower them by learning new skills? Uh,
People with disabilities? Okay, how do you empower people with disabilities to learn new skills and therefore work
yeah,
in arts
yeah,
spaces or any
yes,
other
yes.
spaces? Okay.
Whatever I have understood is like festivals are like giving them a platform, but how to empower them like learning new skills? That's my question.
Yeah, so the question then is I'd say it's how can we invest in learning and development initiatives? Um, whether it's a matter of inviting them into spaces, into festival platforms, whether it's employment opportunities in arts organizations, or really, I don't think your question was restricted necessarily to arts. It was just how can we as individuals and as arts practitioners, in some sense, how can we create new opportunities for them? That's right. Just by doing, yeah.
Anybody here who's from British Council? Okay. So like, because they are there, right? They provide so many grants and everything. Do you accept grants written in other languages except English? If somebody was to ask for a grant in sign language, would you? No, no, no. I'm asking with addressing to him. That how can you do that? So as you say that maybe we are facilitators, but organizations. I'm just using British Council because British Council is one of the key organizations here, and how as that as an organization would provide the platform for those things to happen, right? Why would somebody who's writing in Oria not have the chance of applying for a Charles Wallace the trust grant, right? So that it goes into various dimensions of that. Then automatically asking for a grant in English means that you are including only those who can speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am. I'm just using grant as a that name because but as a grant. So who said that an Oriya speaker cannot? I am very proud to say that I was an Indian who studied in Greece, where I was one of the first Indian for University of Kent course to study in Greece without knowing a word of Greek. Then Ligo Ligo Katalava and then Milas Anglica, Milas Ellenica. Why should that happen that they have to come and ask you why can like when they say right in the mandate that you need to you specify the word limit, right? I don't have to because
Yeah.
you haven't put now just as you all can because you all are in position of power to try certain things and make the change possible.
Have some special needs, we always address it because that is
No, no, agreed. I'm just saying that if like how you specify word limit, if you could just make one line specification saying that your grant in any Indian any language is welcome, then automatically you don't think so you would have people.
to share something with you. The India Foundation for the Arts, they tell you that you can apply in any of the languages, and they will find somebody who can understand and translate it. And also in terms of format, they understand that not everybody can follow a set format with the forms the way they're supposed to. So they say that you send us the application in any format that you're comfortable. So there are organizations that can facilitate.
From the British Council's perspective, I think operationally, you've highlighted some things that could perhaps be worked on. But I also want to draw attention to Unlimited, which is a wonderful festival that is run by the British Council or is supported at least by the British Council. Um, yeah, it's part of the British Council family, which is a festival that's run entirely, the content, all of the performers, the artists, the content, all of it is based on persons with disability. So there are initiatives like that which come from an arts content space, which I think British Council is doing. I think where operationally it is taking time to sort of catch up in some sense. There are initiatives like that. We also this afternoon we were discussing we were discussing a DIY guide that British Council has again facilitated and has released very recently, a guide to making festivals accessible, music festivals accessible. And it's a short primer, very interesting again.
Our work we do address these issues.
Yeah.
But of course,
Yes. Yeah, and that's where we, I think, come back to incremental changes where we're generating content and we're sharing knowledge. How do we then in our own work build it into operations and so on and so forth? I think with that, any other burning questions? No. So thank you very much, Sumona, Anjumdi, Siddhant. Thank you all for coming and participating.
So, guys, when you all ask it what we can do as a takeaway, the reason of giving you that paper of writing two things, right? Make sure that in 1 month's time, if you can incorporate that in your family, with your friends, and in your workplace. I think at least we are like 30 of us, 30 or 30, 40 people here. And if we can do something like that, if we can at least start with that one thing, you'll start seeing things around you change. And we do that as an activity because the another reason of writing about exclusion, right? That why that exclusion happens. So what not to do is that, and what to do is on the other side of your paper. So you already know what to do. So automatically you are going to take away things with you, which you can start with. But the most important thing is to start.
Thank you very much. Thank you all again. I invite you to stay. Kavya will also share feedback forms. Please do fill these out and share them with us. We also have high tea outside, and I really invite you to have some of these snacks. They're wonderful. And thank you again to the British Council for facilitating this session. Thank you to KCC for hosting this session, and thank you all again for coming out today and participating in this discussion. Thank you very much.